Part 1. Commander Sarah Chen stood at the helm of the ESS Tenacity, her reflection ghosting against the backdrop of stars through the bridge's panoramic viewport. The ship's quantum engines hummed beneath her feet, a sound that usually brought comfort, but today only heightened her anxiety. The message from Earth Command had arrived 3 hours ago, and she still struggled to process its implications. "Commander," Lieutenant Rodriguez called from his station, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Alliance Council." Sarah straightened her uniform, squaring her shoulders, put it through to the main display. The holographic projection materialized before her, revealing 3 distinct alien forms. In the center, the crystalline structure of High Counselor Angstera shimmered with internal light. To their left, the gaseous form of Delegate Mistapondon swirled in their containment field. On the right, Admiral Kadar's scaled face remained as unreadable as ever. "Commander Chen," Angstera's translated voice resonated through the bridge, "your species has become a matter of grave concern." Sarah maintained her diplomatic posture, though her hand instinctively tightened on the command rail. "The Earth Alliance has adhered to all established treaties and protocols, Counselor. It is not your adherence to protocols that concerns us." Mistapondon's whispered words came through. "It is your methods. The incident at Proxima Centauri, the defense of New Montana Colony, the resolution of the Orion Crisis. Your species consistently achieves results that should be impossible given your technological level. We are adaptable," Sarah offered carefully. "You are dangerous," Admiral Kadar cut in. "Your soldiers modify standardized equipment in ways that violate basic engineering principles. Your tactics ignore established military doctrine. Your solutions to crisis frequently involve what other species would consider impossible risks." Sarah felt a smile tugging at her lips but suppressed it. The Admiral wasn't wrong. During the Orion Crisis, a single human corvette had disabled 3 dreadnoughts by reconfiguring its waste disposal system into an improvised EMP weapon. At New Montana, civilian mining equipment had been turned into planetary defense systems within hours, and Proxima Centauri, well, nobody had expected a cargo ship's coffee maker to be convertible into a quantum field disruptor. "The Council has decided," Angstera continued, "that humanity must be evaluated. We will determine whether your species represents an acceptable risk to galactic stability. And if we refuse, refusal will be taken as confirmation of our concerns." Mistapondon's form swirled more rapidly. "The consequences would be severe. The evaluation will take place in 3 phases," Admiral Kadar explained. "First, a demonstration of your standard military capabilities. Second, a series of crisis response scenarios. Finally, a direct competition against our most advanced combat units." Sarah noticed what they weren't saying. This wasn't just an evaluation. It was an attempt to understand how humans thought, how they solved problems. The Council wanted to catalog their capabilities, to find ways to counter them if necessary. "Your vessel will serve as humanity's representative," Angstera declared. "You have 24 Earth hours to prepare. Coordinates for the first phase will follow." The transmission cut off, leaving Sarah staring at the empty space where the counselors had been. Behind her, the bridge crew remained silent, processing the implications. "Well," Sarah finally said, turning to face her crew, "it seems we've scared the galaxy. Lieutenant Rodriguez, send word to Earth Command confirming receipt of the Council's message. Major Wu, begin combat readiness preparations. Dr. Evans, I want you to review all our equipment specifications, especially the non-standard modifications." As her crew moved to comply, Sarah returned her gaze to the stars. The galaxy thought they could categorize humanity, put them in a neat box labeled potential threat or acceptable risk. They didn't understand that humans had spent their entire history thinking outside of boxes, breaking paradigms, and achieving the impossible through sheer determination and creativity. The Council wanted to evaluate humanity's capabilities. Fine, but Sarah suspected they wouldn't like what they discovered. Because the true strength of humanity wasn't in their weapons or their technology. It was in their refusal to accept limitations, their ability to see solutions where others saw only problems, and their unwavering determination to survive against any odds. Navigation, she called out, a plan already forming in her mind. Plot a course to the engineering lab. If we're going to put on a show for the galaxy, we might as well make it interesting. The ESS Tenacity's engines pulsed brighter as it changed course, carrying its crew toward a confrontation that would change the galaxy's understanding of humanity forever. Whether that change would lead to fear or respect remained to be seen, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. Part 2. The evaluation arena was a massive construct floating in neutral space, a sprawling collection of interconnected platforms and testing grounds that stretched for kilometers. As the ESS Tenacity approached, Sarah counted at least 30 ships from various species, their designs ranging from the organic curves of Meridian vessels to the crystalline structures of the Arcturus Confederation. Quite an audience, Major Wu commented from his tactical station. They're all here to watch the monkey dance. Then let's give them a show they'll never forget, Sarah replied, keeping her voice low. Status on the modifications. Dr. Evans reports the special projects are ready. Wu grinned. Though she says to remind you that using a quantum stabilizer as a makeshift percussion instrument violates at least 12 laws of physics. Only 12. She's getting soft. The ship's AI, interrupted with its characteristic dry humor. Commander, we're receiving docking instructions. The Council representatives are requesting your presence in the central evaluation chamber. They seem anxious. Sarah straightened her uniform. Maintain alert status. Lieutenant Rodriguez, you have the bridge. Major Wu, you're with me. The walk to the central chamber gave Sarah time to observe the station's design. Everything was standardized, efficient, and utterly predictable. Exactly what she'd expected from the Galactic Alliance. They valued order above all else, which was precisely why humanity's chaos-embracing methods terrify them. The chamber itself was a vast amphitheater, with representatives from dozens of species occupying the tiered seating. At the center, a holographic display showed various military engagements from Earth's history, all carefully selected by the Council, no doubt. High Counselor Angstera's crystalline form glowed with internal light as they addressed the gathering. Commander Chen, welcome to the evaluation arena. We will begin with a simple demonstration of your tactical capabilities, a series of standard combat scenarios. The chamber's emergency lights flashed red. Multiple unidentified vessels dropping out of hyperspace. The announcement echoed through the station. Energy signatures matched no known configuration. Sarah's tactical display lit up with incoming data. 7 ships, their designs unlike anything in Alliance records, were positioning themselves around the station. Their intent was clear. They'd waited for the gathering of high-ranking officials from across the galaxy. This is not part of the evaluation, Admiral Kadar stated unnecessarily, his scaled face showing the first emotion Sarah had seen. Fear. No, Sarah agreed, already moving. This is something better, a practical demonstration. Araya. Execute Protocol Omega-7. The AI's voice came through her neural link. Commander, Protocol Omega-7 is technically a violation of 3 different Alliance weapons treaties. Only 3. Note that in my log is showing restraint. Major Wu, deploy the teams. Let's show our guests how humans handle unexpected situations. The unknown vessels opened fire, their energy weapons attempting to pierce the station's shields. But Sarah had already anticipated their attack pattern. 20 minutes ago, she'd had Dr. Evans reconfigure the Tenacity's waste recycling system to emit a precise frequency of quantum interference. Technically a violation of Alliance protocols, but also exactly what they needed. All ships, Sarah broadcast on an open channel. Adjust your shields to frequency 7.3 beta. Tenacity will provide an opening. The Alliance vessels hesitated, their commanders clearly confused by the unorthodox command. But as the unknown ships pressed their attack, they had little choice but to comply. What happened next would be discussed in Alliance military academies for decades to come. The ESS Tenacity, a ship that was supposedly undergoing evaluation, orchestrated a defense that defied conventional tactical doctrine. Using modified equipment that shouldn't have worked according to known physics, they created opportunities that Alliance commanders wouldn't have thought possible. Sarah coordinated it all from the central chamber, much to the astonishment of the watching council members. When the last unknown vessel was disabled, using a combination of repurposed mining lasers and what was officially logged as a tactically deployed malfunction, the chamber fell silent. How? Admiral Kadar finally asked. Those modifications, those tactics, they shouldn't have worked. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. That's the thing about humans, Admiral. We don't spend much time worrying about what shouldn't work. We're more interested in finding ways to make it work anyway. You anticipated this attack, Terra observed. You had countermeasures prepared. We always have countermeasures prepared, Sarah confirmed. Usually several, often contradicting each other, and at least one involving creative use of kitchen appliances. It's kind of our thing. The council members exchanged looks that Sarah was beginning to recognize. The same mix of fear and fascination that humanity often inspired in their galactic neighbors. But before they could respond, another alert sounded. Commander, Araya announced, we're detecting quantum fluctuations from the disabled vessels. Energy signatures are, well, they're doing something that entirely violates causality. Sarah's smile widened. Perfect. Now we get to show them how humans handle impossible situations. Major Wu, prep the coffee maker. I have an idea. Part 3. The aftermath of the attack should have been a time for recovery and assessment. Instead, the Galactic Alliance Council decided it was the perfect opportunity to begin their formal evaluation of humanity's capabilities. Sarah couldn't help but wonder if they were hoping to catch the ESS Tenacity at a disadvantage. Your first trial will test your combat effectiveness, Admiral Kadar announced from his command ship. We have prepared 3 scenarios that represent the highest standards of galactic military doctrine. Sarah stood on the Tenacity's bridge, watching as massive holographic barriers materialized in space, creating elaborate combat arenas. The first was a dense asteroid field, the second a complex urban environment, and the third appeared to be some kind of energy maze. Each scenario must be completed using standard military protocols. Miss Dependon's whispered voice came through the comm. Any deviation will result in immediate disqualification. Standard protocols, Sarah repeated, sharing a knowing look with Major Wu. Define standard. Established Alliance military doctrine, Terra clarified. The same protocols used by all civilized species. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. And these protocols, they're based on what you consider possible, correct? There was a pause before Kadar responded. They are based on the fundamental laws of physics and tactical reality. Interesting. Sarah turned to her crew. Dr. Evans, remember that discussion we had about reality being more of a suggestion than a rule. You mean the one that gave me 3 separate headaches? Evans replied from her engineering station. Hard to forget. Think it's time to test that theory. Araya, plot a course for the first arena. Let's show them why humans don't believe in impossible scenarios. The asteroid field trial was designed to test precision navigation and target acquisition. The Council expected them to carefully maneuver through the field while eliminating designated targets. Instead, Sarah had Evans modify their shield harmonics to match the resonant frequency of the asteroids. Commander, Araya announced with what sounded suspiciously like amusement. What we're about to do violates 7 different laws of physics. Only 7. Note that as a new personal best. Execute Program Delta. The Tenacity didn't so much fly through the asteroid field as phase through it, their modified shields causing the asteroids to briefly exist in a quantum superposition that allowed the ship to pass through solid matter. They completed the course in record time, leaving the Council observers in stunned silence. That's not possible, one of the Alliance observers sputtered. Funny thing about humans, Sarah responded. We tend to treat impossible as a personal challenge. The urban environment scenario was meant to test precision targeting and collateral damage prevention. The Council watched in horror as the Tenacity's crew reconfigured their sensor array into what Evans called a probability manipulator, allowing them to fire their weapons into seemingly empty space and somehow hit targets around corners. It's simple geometry, Evans explained to the increasingly agitated Council members. If you just adjust your perspective to include 11 dimensions instead of the usual 4. By the time they reached the energy maze, the Council was in an uproar. The maze was designed to be unsolvable, a test to see how species handled failure. Sarah took one look at it and turned to her engineer. Dr. Evans, remember that thing you said would definitely tear a hole in space-time? The thing I specifically said we should never, ever try. That's the one. Evans grinned. Already on it, Commander. What followed was less a solution to the maze and more a complete rejection of its fundamental premises, using a combination of their modified coffee maker, now serving as a quantum probability drive, and what Evans described as aggressively creative interpretation of causality. They didn't so much solve the maze as temporarily convince that section of space that the maze had never existed in the first place. When they emerged on the other side, the Council observation room had gone completely silent. Commander Chen, Terra finally spoke, their crystalline form flickering with what might have been distress. Your methods are unprecedented. Impossible, Kadar corrected. They're impossible. Yet here we are, Sarah replied calmly. You know what humans say about the word impossible. We say it just means no one's been stubborn enough to make it possible yet. You cannot simply ignore the laws of physics. Mr. Pondon's usually whispered voice had risen to something like a shout. Actually, Evans chimed in, we find the laws of physics are quite flexible if you ask them nicely, or in this case, firmly suggest they look the other way for a moment. Before the Council could respond, Araya's voice cut through the conversation. Commander, I'm detecting unusual energy signatures from the disabled unknown vessels. They appear to be, well, the closest approximation would be rewriting local reality. Sarah's expression turned serious. Looks like the real test is about to begin. Council members, I suggest you prepare yourselves. You're about to see why humanity's approach to the impossible isn't just creative, it's necessary. The unknown ships began to glow with an impossible light, their forms shifting in ways that hurt to look at. The Council's carefully controlled evaluation was about to become something else entirely. A demonstration of why humanity's peculiar relationship with reality might be exactly what the galaxy needed. Part 4. Reality itself seemed to shudder as the unknown vessels transformed. Their hulls rippled like liquid mercury, geometric patterns emerging that didn't follow the rules of any known dimensional space. The Council observation deck erupted in chaos as sensors overloaded and AI systems crashed, unable to process what they were seeing. Those ships, Dr. Evans breathed, staring at her readings, they're not just bending physics. They're actively rewriting it. Local causality is completely breaking down. Sarah watched as the nearest Alliance vessel tried to engage one of the transformed ships, only to find its weapons passing harmlessly through what should have been solid matter. They're operating on a different set of physical laws, she realized. That's why conventional weapons aren't working. Impossible. Admiral Kadar's voice crackled through the distorted communications. No species can simply ignore fundamental constants. Oh, now that's just asking for it, Major Wu muttered from his tactical station. Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. Araya, initiate protocol impossibility. Dr. Evans, remember that theoretical discussion we had about reality being more of a democracy than a dictatorship. The one where I said attempting it would probably unravel the fabric of space-time, Evans replied, already moving to her station. The one I specifically noted in my log as Never attempt this unless reality itself is at stake. That's the one. Just checking. Beginning modifications now. The ESS Tenacity's engines pulsed with a new frequency as Evans' modifications took hold. The ship's quantum core, already modified well beyond Alliance specifications, began to hum with a sound that made nearby crew members' teeth itch. "Commander," Araya announced, "what we're about to attempt violates approximately. Actually, I've lost count of how many laws of physics this violates. I believe we're about to invent several new ones." "That's the spirit," Sarah replied. "Major Wu, prepare to execute attack pattern impossible." The Council observation deck erupted in protests as the Tenacity's crew began their preparations. Sarah could hear snippets of their arguments. "They can't. It's not possible. The laws of physics are absolute." "Council members," Sarah broadcast on all channels, "I recommend you brace yourselves. What you're about to see might challenge some fundamental assumptions about reality." With that, she gave the order. The Tenacity's modified systems engaged, and for a moment, reality seemed to hold its breath. Then, using what Evans would later describe in her report as aggressively creative interpretation of quantum uncertainty, they began to fight fire with fire. Part 4. Reality itself seemed to shudder as the unknown vessels transformed. Their hulls rippled like liquid mercury, geometric patterns emerging that didn't follow the rules of any known dimensional space. The Council observation deck erupted in chaos as sensors overloaded and AI systems crashed, unable to process what they were seeing. "Those ships," Dr. Evans breathed, staring at her readings, "they're not just bending physics. They're actively rewriting it. Local causality is completely breaking down." Sarah watched as the nearest Alliance vessel tried to engage one of the transformed ships, only to find its weapons passing harmlessly through what should have been solid matter. "They're operating on a different set of physical laws," she realized. "That's why conventional weapons aren't working." "Impossible." Admiral Kadar's voice crackled through the distorted communications. "No species can simply ignore fundamental constants." "Oh, now that's just asking for it," Major Wu muttered from his tactical station. Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. "Araya, initiate protocol impossibility. Dr. Evans, remember that theoretical discussion we had about reality being more of a democracy than a dictatorship. The one where I said attempting it would probably unravel the fabric of space-time," Evans replied, already moving to her station. "The one I specifically noted in my log as never attempt this unless reality itself is at stake. That's the one. Just checking. Beginning modifications now." The ESS Tenacity's engines pulsed with a new frequency as Evans' modifications took hold. The ship's quantum core, already modified well beyond Alliance specifications, began to hum with a sound that made nearby crew members' teeth itch. "Commander," Araya announced, "what we're about to attempt violates approximately. Actually, I've lost count of how many laws of physics this violates. I believe we're about to invent several new ones." "That's the spirit," Sarah replied. "Major Wu, prepare to execute attack pattern impossible." The Council observation deck erupted in protests as the Tenacity's crew began their preparations. Sarah could hear snippets of their arguments. "They can't. It's not possible. The laws of physics are absolute." "Council members," Sarah broadcast on all channels, "I recommend you brace yourselves. What you're about to see might challenge some fundamental assumptions about reality." With that, she gave the order. The Tenacity's modified systems engaged, and for a moment, reality seemed to hold its breath. Then, using what Evans would later describe in her report as aggressively creative interpretation of quantum uncertainty, they began to fight fire with fire. If the unknown vessels were operating on their own set of physical laws, the Tenacity would simply have to operate on a third set, one that humanity had just invented on the spot. Their weapons, reconfigured through what Evans called wishful thinking made manifest, began to have effect where Alliance weapons had failed. "How?" Angstura's voice was barely a whisper. "How are you doing this?" "Here's the thing about humans," Sarah explained as the Tenacity engaged the nearest enemy vessel. "We don't just think outside the box. When necessary, we'll reject the very concept of boxes. If reality says something's impossible, we don't argue. We just go find a different reality that agrees with us." The battle that followed would be discussed in hushed tones throughout the galaxy for centuries to come. The Tenacity's crew, using technology that by all rights shouldn't have worked, engaged in what could only be described as a reality-bending dogfight. When the enemy ships tried to phase through solid matter, the Tenacity responded by temporarily convincing that section of space that solid matter was more of a suggestion than a rule. When the unknown vessels attempted to rewrite local causality, Evans countered by having the Tenacity's systems operate on what she termed retroactive probability, essentially winning the fight by convincing reality they had already won it. "Commander," Araya announced, "the enemy vessels are attempting to stabilize their reality matrix. They seem confused by our approach." "Can't blame them," Wu commented. "We're confused by our approach. That's humanity's secret weapon," Sarah replied, watching as another enemy vessel fell to their impossible tactics. "We're willing to confuse ourselves if it gets the job done." The battle reached its crescendo as the remaining enemy vessels, perhaps realizing they were facing an opponent who matched their reality-bending capabilities through sheer stubborn creativity, began to retreat. But as they prepared to flee, their earlier manipulations of space-time began to have unexpected consequences. "Commander," Araya's voice carried an unusual note of urgency. "The local space-time fabric is becoming unstable. The enemy's manipulations, combined with our creative solutions, have created a cascade effect." Sarah looked at her displays, watching as reality itself began to fray around the edges of the battlefield. The Council ships were pulling back in panic, but she knew they wouldn't be fast enough to escape what was coming. "Well," she said, sharing a look with her crew, "I suppose this means it's time for Plan Impossible Part 2. "There's a Part 2? Evans asked, looking both terrified and excited. "There's always a Part 2, Sarah confirmed. "After all, we're human. We don't just solve impossible problems. We solve the impossible problems created by our impossible solutions." Part 5. The space around the battlefield rippled like heat waves off hot pavement, reality struggling to maintain coherence as multiple sets of physical laws competed for dominance. The Council ships hung back at what they hoped was a safe distance, watching as the ESS Tenacity positioned itself between them and the growing chaos. "Commander Chen," High Counselor Angstura's voice crackled through the distortion, "your ship's actions have contributed to this instability. The fabric of space-time itself is unraveling." "Technically correct," Sarah admitted, watching as Dr. Evans rushed between control stations. "But you're missing the important part." "Which is?" "We meant to do that." The silence that followed was profound enough to rival the vacuum of space. Sarah could almost hear the collective cognitive dissonance as the Council members tried to process her statement. "You meant to destabilize reality." Admiral Kadar's voice had lost its usual authority, replaced by something between horror and fascination. "Of course," Sarah replied, as Evans finished her modifications. "You can't fix a reality crisis without first understanding exactly how reality breaks. And sometimes, the best way to understand something is to break it yourself. Under controlled conditions, of course." "Controlled conditions." Miss Dawn's whispered voice had risen to a near shriek. "You call this controlled?" "More or less." Sarah shrugged, though they couldn't see it. "Araya, status on the quantum probability matrix. Reality is approximately 47% destabilized," the AI reported cheerfully. "Which, according to Dr. Evans' calculations, is exactly where we want it." Evans looked up from her station. "Ready when you are, Commander. Though I feel obligated to mention that what we're about to try is theoretically impossible in at least 7 different ways." "Only 7. We're getting better at this." Sarah straightened in her chair. Execute Operation Reality Check. What happened next would be debated in scientific circles for decades to come. The Tenacity's modified systems engage, not fighting against the reality distortions, but rather working with them. Using what Evans would later describe as aggressive negotiations with the laws of physics, they began to channel the chaos. The thing about reality, Sarah broadcast to the watching council ships, is that it's more flexible than most species think. The unknown ships prove that by breaking it, we're just proving it by putting it back together, with some improvements. The Tenacity's quantum core pulsed with impossible energies as they essentially convinced local spacetime that it wanted to be stable again. The reality distortions began to fold in on themselves, creating what Evans called a probability cascade that somehow canceled out both the enemy's manipulations and the damage they had caused. Impossible, one of the council scientists muttered over the open channel. They're not just repairing the damage. They're retroactively preventing it from having occurred in the first place. That's humanity for you, Major Wu commented from his station. When we fix something, we fix it so well, it was never broken to begin with. As the last of the reality distortions faded, leaving behind stable spacetime and a lot of confused sensor readings, the council observation room erupted in overlapping conversations. Sarah could hear snippets of argument, debate, and what sounded suspiciously like existential crisis. Finally, Terra spoke. Commander Chen, the council has reached a conclusion about humanity's evaluation. Oh, Sarah tried to keep the amusement out of her voice. And what have you decided? You are simultaneously the most terrifying and most reassuring species we have ever encountered, the High Counselor stated. Your methods violate every known law of physics. Your solutions create as many problems as they solve, and your entire approach to reality seems to be more of a suggestion than a rule. Thank you, Sarah replied sincerely. It wasn't entirely a compliment. Kadar interjected. You understand why you frighten us, don't you? A species that treats fundamental constants as flexible guidelines, that invents new laws of physics on the spot, that seems to succeed specifically because you don't know something is impossible. We understand, Sarah nodded. But consider this, when reality itself was breaking down, when conventional methods failed, who did you want on your side? The species that always follows the rules, or the species that knows when and how to break them? The silence that followed was thoughtful rather than stunned this time. Finally, Miss de Pendon spoke. The Council recognizes that humanity's unique approach to problem-solving may have its advantages. Indeed, Terra agreed. We hereby classify humanity as a Class A allied species with full rights and privileges thereof. However, they added quickly, we do request that in the future you file appropriate paperwork before violating the laws of physics. We'll try, Sarah promised, knowing full well that the next impossible situation wouldn't wait for bureaucracy. Though I should warn you, humans are notoriously bad at paperwork. As the council ships began to depart, Sarah looked around at her crew. The engineers who had rewritten physics, the tactical officers who had implemented impossible strategies, and the scientists who had treated reality as a collaborative effort rather than an absolute rule. She called out, make a note in the ship's log. Today, humanity didn't just prove we belong among the stars. We proved that sometimes the galaxy needs people willing to believe in the impossible, and then make it possible. The AI asked. Exactly, Sarah smiled. After all, that's what humans do best. We make the impossible not just possible, but probable, and eventually, inevitable. The ESS Tenacity's engines hummed as they set course for Earth, leaving behind a galaxy that would never quite look at reality the same way again. And somewhere in the depths of space, reality itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, or perhaps resignation, knowing that humans would continue to treat its laws more like polite suggestions than absolute rules.